Drawn into number 5 is Dragonic Diagram, another limited field spell that searches, but it's the way that Diagram searches that makes it so strong. Diagram has 3 effects, 2 of which are pretty solid. The first effect increases the attack and defense of all True Draco and True King monsters in the field by 300, and the second effect protects your True King and True Draco monsters once per turn from being destroyed by battle. But it's the third effect of Diagram which makes it strong, allowing you to add any True Draco or True King card from your deck to your hand, provided you destroy one card you control or in your hand. At first glance, it appears that Diagram's search effect is a lot weaker when compared to other field spells which search that are on this list. Both Spiral Resort and Trickstar Lightstays let you go +1 in card advantage for free, while Dragonic Diagram makes you destroy a card, which means you're going neutral in card advantage. But it's this destruction which made Dragonic Diagram so strong and so synergistic with certain strategies. Like in True Draco, for example, the deck Dragonic Diagram was made for. In True Draco, you can use Diagram to basically search your entire deck for your True Draco monsters by popping your True Draco spells and traps. And the spells and traps have powerful graveyard effects which allow you to easily take apart boards, with the spell cards letting you destroy your opponent's spell or trap cards, and the trap cards letting you destroy your opponent's monsters. These effects are pretty strong and part of why the True Draco spell and trap cards are so hard to interact with. But it's not like the deck is incapable of using them without Diagram, especially because the True Draco monsters can use their spell and trap cards as tribute fodder. But it's its synergy with other decks which really brought Dragonic Diagram to the forefront of the meta. One of the earliest known uses of Diagram, for example, was in True King Dinosaur, which could use the effect of Diagram to destroy Baby Ceresaurus. This allowed you to trigger Baby Ceresaurus' effect to summon any level 4 or lower dinosaur monster from your deck, usually Soul Eating Oviraptor. And you might think that playing a True Draco monster as a brick in a dinosaur deck seems pretty bad, and you'd be correct, which is why Dinosaur didn't play any True Draco monsters, they instead played True King monsters. Specifically, True King Lithosegem to destroy other copies of Baby Ceresaurus to summon out even more dinosaurs from the deck. This made Diagram an insanely powerful tool for Dinosaur. But there were a few other decks which could use Diagram to even greater effect. Most famously, Zodiac and Metal Foes were 2 decks that could use Diagram very well. Diagram synergized with Metal Foe cards, allowed you to pop your Metal Foes spells and trap cards to use their graveyard effects in a similar way to True Draco. It also synergized really well with Zodiac cards, specifically Zodiac Ramram, which, similar to Baby Ceresaurus, could special summon out a card if it was destroyed by a card effect, specifically a Zodiac monster from your graveyard. This enabled a ton of synergy between the 3 strategies, where a Diagram in hand could be integral for setting up your Metal Foes or Zodiac engine, especially with the release of Masterpiece, the True Draco Slain King. This was by far the best True Draco monster you could search with Diagram, as it was a tower that you could make unaffected by 2/3 of the entire card pool based on what you used to tribute summon with. That and the fact that it came with a free pop and had over 3,000 attack on field because the Diagram made Masterpiece incredibly difficult to out and easy to bring out in Zodiac Metal Foes lists. So much so that Masterpiece has remained banned to this day, while Diagram has remained limited. And that's the main reason why Dragonic Diagram has fallen out of favor. The card is still absolutely absurd for some strategies to the point where dinosaurs can still play Diagram to search out Lithosegem, but it's lost its strength in being synergistic for a lot of strategies, since Diagram has become a lot harder to find with its limitation, and its strongest payoff, Masterpiece, is currently banned. If both of these ban list limitations were reversed, there would be no doubt the Dragonic Diagram would find its way into many deck lists again, purely for how beneficial its search effect was. Rising and shining to number 4 is Necrovalley, a field spell with an insanely strong floodgate, and one that happens to be one of the most eroded cards in the history of the game. Necrovalley's effect has technically varied throughout the game's history based on its current errata, but it's always played a similar role in stopping effects that interact with the graveyard, no matter the errata it's using. Its current effect gives every Gravekeeper monster 500 attack and defense, and prevents any card in the graveyard from being banished. It also negates any card effects that remove a card from the graveyard to a different place, whether that's being a special summon or return to the deck, and it also negates card effects which change the type or attribute of monsters in the graveyard. Now, Necrovalley technically is one of the main playmakers of the Gravekeeper archetype, and is the card that the entire archetype revolves around. But despite that, the Gravekeepers were never a reason why Necrovalley ever saw any play, even though they could easily search the card. The reason why Necrovalley saw and still continues to see competitive play is because of its uses of Floodgate. When Necrovalley hits the field, the entire graveyard is basically shut off from being used entirely. This isn't a problem for some decks which don't care about the graveyard at all, but a ton of decks use the graveyard as a secondary resource and can sometimes play from the graveyard entirely. Drytrons, Tearlaments, and Phantonipes are all great examples and are more than capable of playing the game using mostly, or sometimes only, cards in their graveyard, giving them an incredible amount of recursion and access to an amazing resource. With Necrovalley on the field though, every single one of these decks is cut off from that resource. Drytron can't special summon its monsters from the graveyard, Phantom Knights can't banish cards to search, and Tearlaments can't fusion summon as they'd be moving a card from the graveyard to the deck. And with that resource cut off, these decks can't play, which is why Necrovalley occasionally appears as a tech choice against these strategies. In the current format, for example, Necrovalley is an incredible silver bullet against tier elements and one that greatly aids decks like Dracoslayer, which have easy access to field spells, or decks that are willing to play Metaverse so they can use Necrovalley in your opponent's turn. Not every deck can fully use Necrovalley, however. If you care about your graveyard, Necrovalley has the potential to hurt your deck more than your opponent, especially if you're playing one of the strategies above. But if your deck can play it, Necrovalley serves as an incredible counter to graveyard-reliant strategies and will likely keep seeing play as long as decks that use their graveyard as a resource are around. Swimming into number 3 is Primeval Planet Perlereino, the archetypal field spell for tier elements, the current tier 0 meta threat as of making this video. Planet happens to be another example of a field spell that searches and has 3 absolutely absurd effects. Planet's first effect allows you to add any tier element's monster or Visa Starfrost from your deck to your hand whenever it's activated, essentially unlocking the entirety of the tier element's deck. Not only that, but it gives every tier element's monster and fusion monster an extra 500 attack while they're on the field, upgrading something like a Shiren to a massive 2300 attack. And if that wasn't good enough, Perlereino also acts as interruption and removal with its third effect, which allows you to target and destroy one card on the field whenever a tier element's card is returned from your graveyard to the deck, with this effect being a hard once per turn, as well as the card itself having a hard once per turn on its activation. All of these effects are absurd and contributed to tier element's current tier 0 status. So, let's go through what each of these effects does for the deck. The first effect of Planet ensures that tier elements is never bricking, because it basically represents 3 copies of any main deck tier element monster when it's in your hand. If your current hand isn't capable of comboing, you can use Planet to search out either Merely to mill 3 cards from the top of your deck, or Rhinoheart if you'd rather ensure you mill a specific tier element name. If you already have a way to combo though, you can instead choose to add Shiren as an extra extender in case your plays are interrupted, allowing you to mill 3 cards when you special summon and potentially an extra 5 more if you send a Kelbak or a Yugioh from your hand to the graveyard. And finally, if you have all these cards available to you, you can use Planet to search out Havness, which can act as an extender similar to Shiren in case your plays are interrupted by your opponents or on field monster effect. Or you could simply save Havness in your hand to have as a hand trap during your opponent's turn so you can fusion summon your tier elements on their turn as well as yours. Essentially, the reason why Planet's search is so strong is because it's capable of representing any one of the tier element cards. And if that's where its only effect is, it would still be a powerhouse of a card, but it also comes with an extra 2 absurd effects. The attack boost is definitely the weakest effect of the 3, but by no means makes it weak. With Planet up, it becomes even harder to out tier element's boards simply because every card in the field is gaining an extra 500 attack for free. This turns cards like Rhinoheart and Shiren into 2300 attack beaters, while also strengthening Rukalos and Kaleidoheart to 3500 attack. This is even stronger when you consider tier element Scream. This effect makes it so that whenever a monster is summoned, you get to mill 3 cards. And if you do, every monster your opponent controls, or will control, loses 500 attack until the end of the turn. This means that with Planet up and Scream resolved, you would need a monster with 4000 original attack to crash into Rukalos, which makes for even a harder time when facing tier elements. And last but not least is Planet's Pop. This effect serves tier elements in 3 ways. The first is that it gives your deck free removal. You can fusion summon from your graveyard onto your turn to trigger Planet, allowing you to freely pop any card your opponent controls, from their monsters to their back row, making Planet a really good way to out-problem boss monsters and floodgates. Even during your opponent's turn, as the second way that Planet serves tier elements is as a form of interruption. You see, tier elements are more than capable of triggering Planet on your opponent's turn. Cards like Havness, Scream, and Sulik are more than capable of putting a tier element in the graveyard so they can trigger their effects, allowing for a tier to play on your opponent's turn while also gaining access to Planet as free interruption. The Ishizu cards are also capable of triggering Planet as well, as Keldo and Mudora can be used to return one of your tiers from your graveyard to your deck on your opponent's turn, which also just so happens to trigger the effect of Planet. And the final way that Planet helps tiers is that it's an extender. Similar to Nightmare Unicorn targeting your own Spa Resort, Planet can be used to pop your own tier limit monsters to trigger its effects. This can be insanely useful to pop an Impermed Kit Kalos or Rhinoheart, or any other tier name that you need to fusion summon with. In essence, every one of Planet's effects is amazing and helps with the tier limit game plan. The fact that it acts as interruption, removal protection, an extender, and a starter all in one shows how important the card is for tier limits. And if it were not for Planet, the deck would certainly be considerably weaker. Splashing into number 2 is Runick Fountain, another field spell with a really unique effect in the heart and soul of Runick. While Fountain is face up on the field, you can activate any Runick Quick Play spell card from your hand during your opponent's turn, essentially turning all of your Runick Quick Plays into hand traps. And on a soft once per turn, after a Runick Quick Play spell has been activated, you can target up to 3 Runick Quick Play spells in your graveyard and put them to the bottom of your deck, then you can draw the same number of cards you put back. This effect ensures that Runick is almost never running out of resources, because while you have Fountain face up on your side of the field, you can use your Runick Quick Play spells really liberally. You don't have to worry about losing any card advantage, as Fountain basically replaces all of your Runick spells you've used in the turn with 3 new cards drawn from the top of your deck. This becomes excellent in long grind games, It makes it so that a single fountain ensures that Runick is never falling behind in terms of card advantage, and allows for the deck to win games purely on card advantage even without their battle phase. And Runick is always going to have access to Fountain because every single Runick quick play spell has two effects. The first is their own unique effect, and the second which allows them to summon out any Runick monster from the extra deck to the extra monster zone. Runick has multiple options they can use to summon with their quick plays, but if they need access to Fountain, they're likely going to go into Yugioh, which is a card that searches Fountain from the deck by discarding a card. Meaning that no matter the situation, as long as a Runick has a free extra monster zone, they have access to Fountain. And it sets up the graveyard with Runick spells, ensuring that the next one you activate makes it so that you draw at least 2 cards. The best part is that Fountain's once per turn is a soft once per turn. So even if you draw Fountain, you can use Yugioh to search yet another copy to use its draw effect multiple times per turn, as long as you can set up the graveyard with enough Runick quick play spell cards. This draw effect also pairs excellently with Fountain's first effect. You see, usually drawing cards on your turn is just way better than drawing them on your opponent's turn. A card like Reckless Greed, for example, is great for card advantage, but the cards you draw can't really be used on your opponent's turn, unless they just so happen to be hand traps. Runick Fountain, however, solves this issue by allowing you to activate any Runick quick play spell from your hand. Not only does this allow for Runick to play around strong board breakers like Evenly Match and Lightning Storm, it means that any Runick card drawn off a Fountain can be used to interact with your opponent, not just making Fountain an excellent resource for utility, but also allows it to be great for potentially interrupting your opponent. Overall, Fountain is an absolutely excellent field spell, and one that puts a Runick on the map, as the deck would be far less valuable without both of its effects. So much so that Sprite even began teching in Runick engines just so they could take advantage of the free draw 3 and level 2 body that Yugioh and Fountain provided. Although, despite how absurd Fountain is as a field spell, there is still one more recently banned card that is indisputably the best field spell card that's ever been made. And digging its way to the #1 spot is the now banned Mystic Mine, a card which warped the format and deck building around its existence and could win games entirely on its own. Mystic Mine, like Necrovalley and Zombie World, is a floodgate-like effect. Essentially, while your opponent controls more monsters than you do, they cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. And the inverse is also true. If you control more monsters than your opponent, you cannot activate monster effects nor declare attacks. And if both players control the same number of monsters during the end phase, Mystic Mine destroys itself. This effect is so game-winning because of how much it can restrict your opponent's plays, especially if they're on a monster-heavy combo deck. If you control no monsters, you can just activate Mystic Mine and sit behind it until you deck out your opponent. Since Mystic Mine locks your opponent from attacking, there's no way to go for game by reducing your life points to 0. And since your opponent can't activate monster effects, it can make Mystic Mine really difficult for monster-heavy combo decks to out, as their usual answers to back row like Super Quanto Mech Beast Grampulse and Nightmare Phoenix aren't capable of even attempting to out Mine. And because of this, the existence of Mystic Mine affected the deck building of almost every deck, as in a format where Mystic Mine was legal, there was a chance that you could be caught off guard by it. This led to a ton of deck builders forcing a main deck out to Mine in their deck, even if that card wasn't really that effective in the meta. These cards could range from spell trap card removal like Harvey's Feather Duster or Cosmic Cyclone, to cards that remove monsters from your own field like Dark Hole just so that Mystic Mine would out itself. In fact, it was seen as a huge bonus when a deck had an archetypal out to Mystic Mine with their own engine. Virtual World could play Shoosh, which allowed them to pop Mystic Mine, Eldritch has Conquistador to out it, and more recently Sprite would play Sprite Smashers to banish Mystic Mine from the field. There were plenty of other decks, however, that were far less fortunate and had no archetypal outs to Mystic Mine, and so would either rely on those aforementioned generic outs, or would choose to risk being Mystic Mine for the sake of consistency in their engine. But if those decks ever were Mystic Mined, it was game over on the spot. The auto-win nature of Mystic Mine is what allowed it to see common play in numerous side and main decks from its release to when it was banned, as even in the decks that did play native Mine outs, Mystic Mine could still be an effective counter to those strategies if those outs were baited or dealt with. But as well as in sideboards, Mine also managed to see a fair amount of competitive play as its own deck, testing the limits of Mystic Mine's nature as an auto-win card. The deck would floodgate your opponent out of the game with Mystic Mine backed up with Judgments, Field Barriers, and Dark Bribes to protect it. And these Mystic Mine variants could be quite varied, and allowed for alternative win conditions like Exodia, Last Turn, and Burn to have a spotlight in the game's meta. As when Mystic Mine hit the field, the game was turned on its head and had to be played differently from how you would face any other deck. Mystic Mine can be called many things: unfun, unfair, or even downright toxic. But there is no denying that Mystic Mine had a huge impact on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame and has influenced both deck building and card design, which is why there's no doubt it was the best field spell in the game's history. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other field spells we might have missed or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.